Welcome to the Anika Apple Podcast. I'm your host, Anika Apple, and I'm grateful to have you here today. On today's episode, we are in our week for community, and what we're going to be talking about today is the seat of your power. Where does power come for us as individuals and as we are in community with one another? So we dig deep into this topic today. I also have a great question for you. Why me and why now? And we're going to talk a little bit about what is happening in the world and why you are experiencing some of the things that you may be feeling. But first, I'd love to just jump in where we always start our podcast, from my heart to yours. And today is a little bit different. Usually I have a message, typically a divine message that I share with you, but I want to just ground you in why you come to listen to this podcast. First and foremost, I want you to set an expectation of me that when you come here, you come to hear the truth, because that is what I'm here to deliver to you. While every episode is not coined divine guidance, I am always seeking the voice of God to know what it is that God desires for you to know as we go along our path and our journey in this world. And so I am very comfortable with you setting an expectation to come by and hear truth. And that truth may be my truth. It may be my experiences. It may be what I am learning from the businesses that I lead, from my clients, what I know in the world, and what God is speaking through me. But whatever it is, it will be grounded in truth. The other thing that this podcast is positioned to do for you is to create a sense of preparation for you. And of course, we may talk about things with how to prepare your families for what is to come and things like that. But I want you to recognize in this moment that there's no greater preparation that needs to happen than that which is establishing your own heart, your own mind, and your connection to the divine. When you are grounded and connected and seeking after God, the divine source, whatever it is that you refer to as that higher or greater power, you are preparing yourself for what is to come. I was in scripture this morning, and it was, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." And it reminded me that in the Beatitudes, one of the other ones that I have always clung to is, "Blessed are the pure at heart, for they will see God, they shall see God." And what it reminded me of in this moment, and I know this is another message for me to deliver to the world, but I want to share this piece with you right now. I often thought as a child growing up that it meant keeping your heart pure meant you would once again be able to see God, to be with God. And what I recognize is that in my belief system, that once Jesus made the commitment and saw it through, that the redemption that I've received from my Lord and Savior, who is Jesus Christ, connects me back to God. It is the commitment that I will see God again, that I will rejoin God because I have life everlasting. Now, if we backtrack a little bit to "Blessed are the pure in heart, before they will see God," this is a different context. My understanding in this moment is that because I continue to work on operating with a pure heart, I get to experience God while I am here in the land of the living. That I get to see the hand of God moving on my behalf and in the world to create what it is that God desires. So I don't have to wait until the end of life to experience the connection with God. I have it all the time. And what I believe that you can take from it in this moment is that the constant choice to operate from a pure heart puts you in position to see and experience God. God moving through the situations and circumstances, God showing up miraculously in your life, God doing things and standing up for you and avenging you and creating opportunities and divine connections for you in ways that perhaps you may not have experienced yet. So I would call your attention to the purity of your heart. And purity is not perfection. It does not mean being perfect. What it means is that you are constantly seeking and you sit with the desire to have a pure heart. The purity of your heart doesn't mean that you always get it right. It's about your surrendering to God, your love, genuine love for God. And what I know is that in this time that we're in, God cares more about the positioning of our hearts than anything. The position of our hearts is so incredibly important to God. And God is looking, observing, wanting to know, where are our hearts positioned? A good friend of mine, one of my best friends, God said to them, they say they love me, they use my name, but their hearts are far from me. And we know that's connected to scripture. And here's the thing. These were not people who don't know God. They were not people who don't have a relationship with God. Where God was referring to are people who use God's name consistently, yet have not sought God to understand what it is that God is saying, what God desires in this time. And so from my heart to yours, what I would encourage you to do is to really do some introspection, to think about where your heart posture is. Are you really seeking God? And as you seek God, is it from a place of purity? When you seek God, are you looking to understand more of what God desires from you? A lot of times we will go to God because there's something that's happening that we don't like in the world. I'm unhappy with the results of this. I'm unhappy with the way I'm being treated here. I'm unhappy with what's happening on my job or in my relationship. And we go in with this desire for God to change the other person. I know because I was there. I've shared many times that in my path of my prior marriage that I prayed a lot for my spouse. I prayed for myself too, but I prayed for God to change my spouse, to change his mind on things, to change some of the ways in which we connected and interacted about things. And what God did was exactly the opposite. God changed me. God helped me see myself, helped me understand why I needed to be the change, why it was important for me to understand who I was and what I was doing and what I was contributing or not to the health of that relationship. See, purity is going to God without an expectation of how the outcome has to happen. You can have a desire for whatever it is, but you've got to be open for God to show you you. So come by, listen to the podcast, and expect the truth and this introspective perspective that I'm going to hand you often is so that you can be prepared for what is to come. Because what I know that I know is that when I reflect back on the scriptures that I've shared with you, is that I will see God's hand in this lifetime. I am seeing it all the time already. It's how I can be at peace, even in a moment of so much happening in the world. It's how I can be at peace knowing what I know that I know that is to come and still be here smiling, knowing that there is safety and contentment in God, which is far beyond what happens in my physical surroundings and experience. That peace is unshakable. And it is the way that God desires us to operate and to live our lives. It's actually what allows us to live fully. So let's get into our conversation for today's episode, the seat of our power. So to start, every week when we come back to talk about community, I want you to think about community in relationship to who you are in relationship to others, to think about community with what happens in your workplace because your work groups are communities, to think about who you might lead or support out in the world through your ministry, through the work that you do, through the gifts that you share with the world, and to think of the world as a whole, as community, because we are that. Whether or not we operate like that, we're designed to be community. And so, a lot of times when we look at what's happening in the world, we see the struggle, the wrestling back and forth for power. And this power that I speak of is something that we see as external. It's gained by doing something or by taking something, making something. There's some action that then gives us the opportunity to have what we have coined as power. And power is synonymous with influence and so many other terms. It also is often connected to financial wealth and having authority. But what I want us to think about today in relation to this conversation around community is that the true seat of our power comes from love. Go ahead and lean back in your chair for a minute, take a sip of your tea, because this thing is about to get real for us. If you don't have love or operate from love, you are not in the fullness of your power. And as community right now, we are definitely not standing in the fullness of our power. We are not even operating with an iota of it because we have forgotten that the greatest of all these is love. We've forgotten that we are supposed to show up from a place of love. We have forgotten that the baseline of grace is love. We have forgotten that we are called and expected to love one another. And if you know, you know, right? So here's the thing. When we desire to operate from a place of power, we've got to check the source of that. There is a source of power that you could have that is not sufficient enough for what it is that you are trying to do. Imagine sticking a plug for a light in an outlet, but the outlet is attached to a breaker that's turned off. Well, you might have made a connection, right? But there's no energy flowing through there. Imagine putting the wrong size battery. Perhaps you have something that runs on double A's and you put a triple A battery in there. You've put a power source in there, but it's certainly not the right thing. It's not going to have the capacity to give whatever the instrument is that you need, right? Like I'm thinking of my remote right now. You know, if I go and try to turn on the TV and it takes double A and I put triple A in there, the TV is not going to do anything. You see, we sometimes will allow ourselves to be connected into a source that is not what we really desire, what we want. It's not going to give us the juice that we need to do what it is that needs to be done in the world. And if love is really the seat of our power, and it is, then how will we shift what we disagree with in the world if we don't do it from a place of love? The problems that we're experiencing right now, pick a country around the world, they are rooted in the lack of love. Love is what creates understanding of one another. It's what encourages us to seek curiosity. It's what allows us to hold space for people even when there are differences. If you think about the challenge of us coming together today and you think, oh my gosh, there's all these dividing lines. We have different political agendas and there's all these differences with who we are between gender and race and all of these things. And you think that that is the thing that is really creating this moment of complexity for us. How can we come together if we are so different? But I will double down on this and say it's much deeper rooted than the things that we see and that we might identify as reasons to keep us separate, because love starts in the home. And I'm just going to venture to say that there are a lot of people operating right now who are not demonstrating genuine love in their homes. We see so many marriages breaking up and relationships breaking up. And some of that I know is required because there's growth and evolution that's happening. So I'm not suggesting that anyone stays in a relationship that is unhealthy for them. I'm not saying that at all. But what I draw your attention to is that if you are sharing a home with people, your children, your partner, your spouse, other family members, ask yourself, are you really showing up with love? Because when you show up with love, you create the conditions for others to grow. And by and large, their growth means that you're going to experience some discomfort. As a parent, when I create this space for my children to make decisions, I have to let go of the desire for them to choose what I want them to choose. And some of you are like, I don't agree with that parenting. That's fine. Take that to God. But here's the thing. At some point, they leave me and they go out into the world, and they've got to be able to know how to manage themselves without calling me 24/7 to say, what do I do? And the best way I can build that is by teaching it, by demonstrating and creating space for them to learn and grow. They're great children. They have a really good capacity and a good level of conscious capacity for love, and a level of consciousness and a relationship with God that rivals a lot of the adults that I know. And so I would say to you that the love that we infuse in our home, the way we love one another, allows us to operate from our seat of power. Because that genuine power is tapped into the true source, which is God. When you are demonstrating that you are tolerating the people you live with, who you spend most of your time with, you are likely not standing fully in your seat of power. And when we look at ourselves from a place of distaste or disappointment, blame, shame, guilt, whatever things we may be operating with internally that we have not addressed to heal, we're not operating from our seat of power. Loving myself doesn't mean that I have to agree with everything I say or do. It doesn't mean that I have to look back across my life and say I've always been perfect, because that is not the case. It doesn't mean that in a moment I respond to something and I don't check myself like, why did I respond in that way? Loving myself is giving myself grace when I make a decision or a choice, when I say or do or think something that is out of alignment with who I know my soul to be. Love allows me to see myself and give myself grace and begin with forgiveness. And the more that I know how to create that relationship with myself, which includes forgiveness, the easier it is for me to give it to those around me. The easier it is for me to look at the things that I see and experience in the world that are hurtful and harmful, and still find a way to extend grace and understanding, sometimes even curiosity, and all the time rooted in a love that is much bigger than like. We want to be in these relationships where we like people, right? Where people like us, we like them. And like is good, but it's not the same thing as love, not by a long shot. Like, tolerance, all of those things are often created from this place of wanting to get along, wanting to navigate through challenge. It is certainly not the same as having love. Love is being able to extend grace even when you disagree, even what the other person is doing and how they are being is not aligned with who you are or what you desire. And until we are able to sit in that seat of power, we're going to have a very difficult time coming together. We're going to have a difficult time navigating our work relationships when we are not in agreement. We're going to have a difficult time in community with one another, rallying to change systems and processes, to come together across lines that have been created to divide us because we cannot find the unifying piece, which is love. You want to know why we're struggling right now? One of my good friends, Josette, said a couple of weeks ago, she said, shame becomes blame. And she was talking about the response that so many people were having post-election, but it is so relevant to everything in our world. When we do feel shame, we look for blame. Think about the last time that you were frustrated about something. Did you go to the external force or did you look at yourself first? See, our inability to see ourselves and to respond to ourselves with love sets the table. Well, if I don't operate in that way for myself, then it's easy for me to not operate in that way with other people. And for some of you, people who typically are find it easier to extend grace to others than to yourself, you may be doing that. You may see that you are still giving grace to others, but you got to check your heart. Because often what that is covering is it's an outward act, but inside you're really mad about it, right? And it builds up over time to a place where you become resentful and angry, and then you can't control this ability to extend grace when that is not genuinely what you want to give to others. We're always going to come back to the root of what is happening within ourselves. Because when we do the work on ourselves, we are then able to extend whatever it is that we are trying to give to others from a place of purity. In our time right now, in order for us to come together in community, we have to operate from a place of love. And so in your workplaces, love looks like extending grace. It looks like being thoughtful about the decisions that you're making, even policies that you are creating. How are you holding space for people who have beliefs and opinions that are different from yours? How are you helping people navigate along the change curve for things that you might be building or designing or launching in your businesses? Because the reality is, if you go back, I know I talked a lot about 2020 in the last several podcast episodes, and this one is this one's going to follow along on that trend, because we are about to walk into a time that looks a lot like what we experienced, but not. Some of the foundational pieces that we are going to go through, you've already been through them. The question is, what did you learn from them? How did you operate differently? Because if you're not operating in a way that was different from how you were in 2019 to the first half of 2020, we got a problem. Because what we are going to see repeated will be exacerbated by our response to those things. It took a lot of people a long time to get on board. I still see people in the airport scoffing at people like myself wearing masks, but here's the thing. I will tell you, my immune system carried well. I had 3 people in my house that had COVID, and I did not get it from any of them. I went 3 years without getting COVID. 3. And I'm just going to tell you, and I worked. And I was out, I was in the gym and all of these other places. And I'm just going to tell you that there is something for us to recognize here that hopefully we learned from what we went through with COVID and all of the social unrest that we experienced. Because all of those things are at play in this very moment. They're speeding up. And you're seeing some evidence of it on social media, but it's tiny. There are a ton of other acts that are happening right now that people have not connected to what is happening, but you will. It's going to be undeniable by the end of next month. And that's a problem for us, because it is so much harder to dig out of something than it is to address it head on. Imagine for a moment that you were gearing yourself up for a fight. Do you want to be flat-footed on the ground in front of you? Or do you want to be fighting coming out of a hole? I'm not talking about a hole that you created behind your own safeguard, behind your own wall. I'm talking about right in front of the adversary. You want to be fighting your way up out of a hole? Because that's where we're allowing ourselves to go. And I know that for some of you right now, you're thinking, but how can my showing up with love change things? Here's the thing. The reason the seed of love is so powerful is because it's amplified by God. When you operate from love, it is magnified by the greatest power source that there is, that of God. So whether it is at work, at home, in the community, with your family, with your churches and your ministry, You amplify it when you operate from a place that is grounded in the true source. So it's not just simply you. It's not just simply Anika showing up with grace and love. It's amplified. Imagine my heavenly army behind me amplifying love. We cannot allow ourselves to see ourselves as individuals, as one person showing up to battle with one small weapon in our hands, right? That's not what this is. We come fully armed to battle what is not light in this world. And this is not about physical weaponry. It's about your true divine power, which comes directly from love. So how do you do it? How do you tap into this power? First and foremost, you start working on yourself. If you heard the opening message and from my heart to yours where I talked about the purity of your heart, it's a place to start. It's surrendering to the divine, operating in your full and genuine power. What is true? What is love? What is grace? Being strengthened by it, seeking God for it, asking God, how do I operate through this decision making? What is it that you want me to do today? How can I be present for this person in my home or at my job? How am I present for these people who are struggling right now? Can you imagine the impact of just looking at people in the world from a place of love? People who don't feel seen. And what happens in that chain event, right, is I felt unseen and now I know I am seen. And so now I duplicate the behavior that I saw. And so rather than someone who has been bullied turning around and becoming a bigger bully, we shift the paradigm. Because what people want to demonstrate is more of that good feeling of love. And your responsibility is not to change everybody in the world. It's just to create the impact with the people who you are connected to. The seat of your power is in love. Begin with loving yourself. And then look at how you can help create more love in our community. And then how you can operate from a place of love in the things that you have decision-making ability, in the places that you are called to lead, in the places that you've chosen to build. Is love infused in your business, in your ministry, in your home, in your parenting, in your partnering? Is love there? And if it's not, it is the only thing that matters in this moment. And perhaps some of you are like, Anika, I am struggling financially, or I'm worried about if I'm going to have food and resources for my family and all of these things. And here you are talking about love. But have you ever stopped to think about the impact that you might have on someone else that might remember you in your time of need? Have you stopped to think about how your act of kindness might open up the heart of someone else who then has the ability to influence and impact hundreds of others? You cannot minimize what it is that God wants to do through you simply because you've not seen the full plan. Instead, you get to choose to trust that God can amplify the impact of whatever it is that you extend to the world. And if you trust God, the divine, as your safety and security, then you know that you're going to have what you need. It may not always be what you want, because there's lessons for us to learn in that. But having what we need, That's a commitment from God. When we believe and know, we stand on God's promises, that is their commitment. So, more than anything else, I would call you back to having some one on one time with the divine, with God, with your higher power, to understand what it looks like for you to operate more from a place of love. And then I would challenge you to ask that next question: how do I better love myself? And from that question of how I better love myself, the next would be, how do I show up to infuse more love in the world? And how can the love that I bring to the world be amplified to make an even bigger impact? You see, I started talking about how we think about power as coming from the actions that we take rather than our beingness. But our being love, centered in love, is what leads and guides us to make decisions that can have incredible impacts on others. It's so different than taking action for something that is momentary and outside of ourselves. Something that people have the ability to take away and strip from us when they have chosen to change the rules. If you feel like this is a moment where you do not feel your full control, I would tell you, it is not to look external to say who took it from me, but it is to look internal and determine how you have chosen to give it away. Because standing grounded in your seat of power, in knowing who you are, in knowing your connection to the source, that is something no one can take away from you ever. Grounded in love, we move forward. Grounded in love, we change the world. Grounded in love, we create the kind of world that we want to live in. And we need each other, which is why this is a message for us on our community week. Because we're creating the future for one another. And it will take us all to stand in our power, the true seat of power, to create the kind of change we want to experience. Only love can conquer hate, can cast out the darkness, because love is light. And we carry that in our souls. And it's simply a choice to allow it to be here, present, to show through, and to create the change in the world. So for our Ask Anika Anything question today, what came up for me, and this was a divine question that came forward today, but why me and why now? And it's a beautiful dovetail from where we ended our message in the podcast today around community. Because it's time. Because it's your time. It's not by accident that you're listening to this message. You're ready to step into the fullness of who you are, to show up in the world in the way that the world needs you. You're ready to create the kind of change that you were divinely created to change. You're ready to allow your voice to be heard, to be seen, to be known. You're ready. You are ready. And one thing I would tell you is that as we go about life, people often don't understand our divine assignments, right? We don't have a full playbook to be like, well, it says here on page 49 that I'm supposed to show up on this day and do this thing. We don't have that. And not only do we not have that, but we definitely don't have a map of understanding of what everyone's divine assignment is around us. We may be blessed enough to have peeks under the tent here or there to know a little bit about what someone is divinely positioned here to do. But I can promise you, you're seeing some examples right now in the world of people who've been divinely assigned to do things that you probably don't agree with because you don't understand their assignment. And that's okay. You don't have to. But what you do have to do is make a decision about your own assignment and recognize that even if people around you don't understand your full assignment, that's okay because they didn't get the memo. They didn't get the opportunity to read the playbook. They don't know all of what it is that you were called here to do. But you do. At a soul level, with resonance. You might have heard it said before that when there's a problem that you see in the world and you feel called to it, like there's something you're supposed to do about it. There is something that you are supposed to create to help change it. There's something that's calling you forward. It's because it's connected to your purpose. And sometimes those things are experiences that you are meant to have so that you gain a broader perspective for whatever it is that you are to build or to do or to create. Sometimes it is about learning lessons so that you can hold space with love and grace for others. But whatever it is that you are feeling compelled to explore and to understand more deeply now, you need to do it. And so whether that's in the hours in the evening that you would be scrolling on your social media platforms, or if it's taking a class, or if it's traveling, whatever it might be, take it to God, get the clarity, and it's time. It's time. Something happens when we operate, obviously, from love, as I've talked about throughout this podcast, but there's something that happens when we say yes to our purpose. The wheels start to turn, things start to become in motion. People would say the universe is conspiring on your behalf. I would say God is creating the pathway forward for you. So why you? Why now? Because we need you now more than ever. And for some of you, as you're listening to this message, you're like, I know, I've been needed. I get it. No judgment here. God started talking to me about my path forward long before I said yes and showed up consistently reporting for duty. A long time before. So there's no judgment here. But I am telling you that it's time. We need your love and your light, your kindness, your creations, your wisdom, your teachings to come into the world. We need your divine perspective and understanding about things. We need your vision for what systems could be so. We need you to step forward, saying yes to being who God has called you to be. And quite honestly, I would say to you that as I think about an example, imagine that you were involved in this beautiful production. Perhaps it's a movie or a play. And there's a lot of action in it, and you have no stunt double. Or imagine if the co-star hadn't shown up. The writers, directors, you get the picture. We can't put on this amazing production without all of the pieces. Sure, there's some understudies and some people who are multi-talented who might be able to fill in a couple of places. But when the masses are not there, it's difficult to say the show must go on. But this is life, and life must go on. So we need you. And pushing past the fear and discomfort of saying yes is something that we've all had to do. And you can do it too. I would share with you as we wrap up that one of the ways that you have the opportunity to connect with me is through my community. Within my remarkable community, I have a space called the Healing Crusade, and we do work to do our own healing as well as collective healing. We base a lot of what we do on the Wheel of Life, focusing, of course, on healing at a spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical level. And we heal at our own pace. So we utilize challenges to help us see ourselves throughout the course of each month. And based on where your areas of focus are, you have the opportunity to apply that focus area to the various challenges that we do. We've seen some really awesome strides in people's ability to see themselves and say yes to their assignment. There's also been some incredible healing experiences and some really cool miracles that we have experienced as a community. If you'd like to learn more, take a look at the show notes, and there's a link to both my website and to the Healing Crusade. The other opportunity that you have to work with me is that I also am a coach and advisor. And on my website, you can find more information about the different programs I offer. One of the newest things that I've added to my offerings is called Soul to Crown, Crown to Soul, which is a healing experience. And I help people remove some of the blockages that they are experiencing. One of the things that I recently shared with a community that I am a part of, the Beyonding community, is a session called Breaking Up with Your Limiting Beliefs. And in there, I do a healing capsule. And this healing capsule has become part of the hallmark of what I do, where I take groups through healings. And if that is something that you're interested in, perhaps a community that you are a part of, or a small group, or if you'd like to host it for some of your friends and family, then you can set up time to do a connect call with me, which you will also find in the show notes. And I'm happy to talk about what that engagement could look like and explore setting that up with you and the groups that you're interested in supporting. I thank you for listening today. And most importantly, I thank you for saying yes to sitting in your seat of power, to operating from a place of love, and for saying yes, because it is your time. And the time is now, and you are so needed. We need your light and your love. Share this with a friend, and if you haven't, please make sure you subscribe so that you never miss an episode. I wish you, as always, peace and blessings.